Access Minnesota, issues that matter to you. Access Minnesota brings you the newsmakers and the stories that shape our everyday lives, with analysis from University of Minnesota faculty experts.
When we look at a building, we tend to focus on its physical appearance, but a building's design goes beyond what we see outside. It's what will go on inside that often influences an architect's work. This month on Access Minnesota, we'll look at two redesigned University of Minnesota buildings. Later in the show, we'll visit North Minneapolis, where the U of M's Urban Research and Outreach Engagement Center has transformed a former strip mall into a conduit for partnerships between the university and the North Side community. But first, the Weisman Art Museum's director and chief curator, Lyndel King, tells us about the museum's recent expansion designed by the original architect, Frank Gehry. After a year-long closure, King says the museum reopened last month with 5 new gallery spaces.
We've added about 8,000 square feet, but I can tell you that it feels much bigger than the square footage actually says that it is, because all the space we've added is public space. No behind-the-scenes space, no offices, no storage or anything like that. So you really feel the impact of the addition when you walk into the galleries. We always knew we needed more space. When we opened in 1993, we couldn't afford to build as much as we thought we needed, particularly to show the collection, particularly, again, for public space. So we'd always planned to add on. We didn't have specific designs, but we did have areas that we thought we could add on to when the time came. So it was about a little after our 10th anniversary of being open that I decided that we should start exploring the possibility of increasing to the space that we thought we should have had in the beginning. So we started talking about it, thinking about it, building support then, and we were able to do it now. The timing was also driven by Frank Gehry. We knew that we wanted Frank to design the new space because we see this building really as a giant sculpture. And it's really hard to think about asking another artist to change a predecessor artist's work. So if you think of it as a work of art, then we knew we needed to have Frank Gehry do it. And Frank Gehry had his 82nd birthday this year. So when we talked to him about it, he said, let's go ahead. He said, I want to do this for you before I lose it. Well, it's hard to think of an architect as vital as Frank and still working so much as losing it. But that was another thing that drove the timing. For one thing, Frank has a great affection for Minneapolis. It's been a place that has supported his career for a long time. The Walker Art Center did really the first major exhibition of his work when Martin and Mickey Friedman were there. And then the Wintons, Penny and Mike Winton, commissioned him to build a guest house. So he's always had an affection for Minneapolis. When we first talked with him about doing our building, he wasn't, of course, the rock star architect that he is today. It wasn't that he was unknown by any means, but he certainly didn't have the stature that he does today. And he'd also never designed an art museum from the ground up. When we started this process back in about in the 1980s of trying to decide on an architect to build this building, we knew it was a rather small project, and so we were surprised that so many architects were interested in responding to our request for proposals. But when you think about it, if you're an architect, maybe you'd rather work with a museum director than a shopping mall developer to do a new building because the values are more similar. They share your aesthetic, your sense of design. So Frank was actually quite eager to work with us on this project back when we first started working with him because he really wanted to design an art museum. I think the Weisman is really a turning point in his career because it was the first art museum that he designed from the ground up, and then he went on to do Bilbao, the Guggenheim in Bilbao, Spain, and the Disney Concert Hall. So it was one of the first where he used so much metal in the way that he used it. It was one of his first cultural buildings, and so I think that it'll be seen as really the predecessor for those buildings, where he really used the shapes, the materials in the way that he did. The Guggenheim Bilbao and the Weisman have a lot of similarities. We're both on a river, we both have a big bridge right next to us, and so I do think that we were kind of his testing ground for those buildings that came after. One big change, though, that happened between our building and all the rest is the computer. And it's not that Frank uses the computer to design with, but he uses the computer to implement his design ideas. He didn't have the software when he did this building that he has now. And that software allows him to more directly realize his designs. With our building, he had to straighten out some of the curves, make the curves less complex. The drawings for the Weisman Art Museum and the drawings for Bilbao are more similar than the actual buildings are. Because for our building, he had to make the curves more geometric, the shapes simpler, because he didn't have the computer system that allowed him to translate those complicated shapes into construction drawings. Now he has that, and so that's one reason that the subsequent buildings look different from the Weisman. So it was kind of a pivotal building that way. It was the last building that he did without that computer system, by hand, in other words. It's called the Tin Can, it's called the Exploding Artichoke, it's been called a landing station for space vehicles, and other things that probably aren't even as complimentary as that. But I think that people now regard it with affection, in a certain sense, because he has achieved that status, and because it has achieved status. It really, I think, symbolizes a futuristic thinking, and it places our city, our region, in the center of that looking to the future rather than necessarily looking to the past. I think it certainly does that for the university. It's a symbol of creativity, it's a symbol of innovation. So there are a lot of people who still don't like the building, but I think that's okay. It does make them think. Nobody says, oh yeah, I know that building, it's okay. We're not a whatever building, and I think that's great. We have a number of different focuses for our collection. We're not as pure as, for example, the Walker Art Center, nor are we an encyclopedic museum like the Minneapolis Institute of Arts, but we have some pockets of strength in our collection. One is American art from the first half of the 20th century. We also have a very strong ceramics collection, and we have a traditional Korean furniture collection that's probably the best outside of Asia. We really distinguish ourselves by our approach to our collection as much as what's in it. We want to use our collection for educational purposes. We see ourselves as your entry-level museum. So the way that we approach the collection, the way we use it for our educational mission, I think is what distinguishes us rather than the fact of what's in it. Because the new space was intended to be primarily to show our collection and to be able to use the collection for our mission, we tried to think about what would be the best way to organize it. And we don't have a chronology. We can't show you a chronology of the world's art. Because we have pockets of strength, we decided to have this first year particularly be about how the collection grew. We called it Cartography of a Collection. And so we're mapping how events and people influenced the growth of the collection since 1934, when the museum was started. So in our Woodhouse galleries, we are showing the influence of Hudson Walker, who was our first director, and of Lotus Kaufman, who was the president of the university at the time the museum was founded. So we have works that were given to us by Walker when he died in 1978. He wasn't the director very long, but he remembered the museum and gave us a lot of his collection when he died. So we have the strength of his gifts are shown in a couple of galleries. And then we talked about Ruth Lawrence, who was the second director. She convinced the university to provide some funds for her to buy works of art. That's something I've never been able to do, but I don't feel too bad about it because she convinced them to give her a percentage of all the money that was left over at the end of the year in the university budget. Well, as you can imagine, there's no money left over at the end of the year, excuse me, at the university. So she bought some of the amazing early modernist things in our collection. She bought Georgia O'Keeffe, she bought Arthur Dove, she bought a lot of the artists that are now considered the masters of early American modernism. So we have some areas that really talk about her influence on the collection and what she bought and how she did it, so we show that. We also then have the Target Studio for creative collaboration, and that is an area that houses a new program that's intended to bring people from different disciplines together with artists and designers to do collaborative projects. And we don't really know what's going to happen in that space in the long-term future, but the first project there was a project that put together architects, landscape architects, and artists to think about how to revitalize the area that's right in front of the museum. You know, we have a new building just across from us, the Science Teaching and Student Services building. We understand that 30% of the undergraduates at the university take classes in that building. That's a huge audience. That's just the kind of people we want to attract. We've got Kaufman Union on one side. We've got this new Student Services and Science Teaching classroom. And so the space between us and that building could be a gateway, could be a really important plaza, but right now it's kind of a transit way and a bicycle parking lot. So the collaborations in the Target Studio are intended to help us figure out how we could make that into a more vital place, a better front yard for both of us, and a place that would make students want to stay in it rather than just, you know, just move back and forth. So that's the project in our new Target Studio. Because we wanted to focus on the collection, but we wanted to have some new works, we also commissioned 2 artists to do what we call sympathies projects in our temporary exhibition space. We commissioned Sharon Loudon, who's a New York-based artist, and In-Young Su, who's on our faculty, the University of Minnesota faculty at Duluth, to look at specific pieces, specific areas of our collection, and create a new work based on those areas. Sharon Loudon took the building and Frank Gehry's drawings as her inspiration, you might say, for her creation of a new work. And In-Young Su took our Korean traditional furniture collection and made a very different work that's based on, that's inspired by her time that she spent looking at our Korean collection. So basically the whole museum this opening year celebrates the collection of the museum in different ways, but it all fits together, I think, to make a celebration of a whole.
When Access Minnesota returns, we'll talk with Senior Vice President Robert Jones about the university's efforts to help reshape Minneapolis's North Side community.
Access Minnesota will return after these messages.